Have you ever noticed that some of the most profound pain comes not from someone who hurts us intentionally, but from someone who simply cannot love us the way we need to be loved? There's a peculiar kind of heartbreak that most people have experienced but rarely speak about openly. It's the ache of loving someone who is fundamentally unavailable, unreachable, perhaps even incapable of reciprocating the depth of feeling we pour into them. We tell ourselves it's just bad timing. We convince ourselves that if we love them enough, if we wait long enough, if we change enough, somehow they will wake up and see us the way we see them. But that day never comes, and yet we stay. We remain in this liminal space where hope and heartbreak dance together, where every small crumb of attention feels like a feast, where the possibility of love matters more than the reality of its absence. The question that haunts us is simple but painful. Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we fall in love with people who cannot love us back? The answer is more complex than we might initially think. It's not simply about being foolish or desperate or broken. It's about psychology, about patterns that were written into us long ago, about the way our minds are wired to seek completion in another person. Consider this. The first person who ever loves us unconditionally or claims to is often a parent or caregiver. When that love is reliable, warm, and present, something shifts in us. We learn to expect it, to trust it, to believe that we are worthy of it. But what happens to children who grow up with inconsistent love, whose caregivers are present sometimes and absent other times, whose affection is sporadic, conditional, or entirely unavailable? These children learn something different. They learn that love is something to be earned through persistence. They learn that people who matter are often difficult to reach. They learn that there is something inherently challenging about connecting with others, and that this struggle is simply the nature of relationships. When these children grow into adults, this belief system doesn't disappear. Instead, it becomes the invisible lens through which they view romantic love. They find themselves drawn to people who are distant, who are emotionally unavailable, who present a puzzle that feels familiar because it mirrors the very dynamic they experienced in their formative years. There is a psychological concept called the repetition compulsion. It describes the unconscious drive to recreate familiar patterns from our past, even when those patterns have caused us pain. We are drawn to what we know, what feels like home, even if home was never really safe. A person who grew up with a withdrawn parent might find themselves pursuing someone who is cold, guarded, or dismissive. They tell themselves the story that they can fix this person, that their love is the missing ingredient that will finally crack the code and make this unavailable person available. This is the fantasy at the heart of it all, the belief that we have special power, that our love is different, that we are the exception who will finally make them change. But here's the uncomfortable truth that we resist with every fiber of our being. You cannot love someone into becoming capable of loving you. You cannot rescue someone from their own unavailability. You cannot be the reason they suddenly transform. Yet we spend months, sometimes years, attempting this impossible task. We modify ourselves. We become smaller, more accommodating, more flexible. We prioritize their needs while our own shrivel from neglect. We convince ourselves that this sacrifice is noble, that this is what love looks like. In reality, this dynamic has a name. It's called anxious attachment, and it represents one of the most painful relationship patterns a person can develop. Anxious attachment typically forms when a child's needs for closeness and reassurance are inconsistently met. Sometimes the parent is warm and engaged. Sometimes they are distant and cold. The child never knows which version of their parent they will get, so they develop a hypervigilance to their parents' moods and needs. These children become expert readers of other people. They learn to scan for danger, to sense emotional shifts, to adjust their behavior to maintain whatever connection they can access. They become masterful at intuiting what others want and providing it because their survival felt like it depended on it. As adults, this translates into a pattern of gravitating toward people who cannot love them predictably. Why? Because at some level, the struggle feels correct. It feels like the authentic version of love, the only version they truly know how to engage with. A person with anxious attachment will feel bored, even disconnected, with someone who loves them straightforwardly and without reservation. That kind of secure, stable love doesn't trigger the familiar excitement of the pursuit. It doesn't activate the nervous system in the way they've become accustomed to. Instead, they seek out someone who is emotionally unavailable, someone who provides intermittent reinforcement, someone who keeps them guessing. This is actually a more powerful psychological hook than consistent love would be. Think about gambling. What makes gambling so addictive is not winning every time. It's winning sometimes, unpredictably. The uncertainty creates a dopamine response in the brain that is stronger than predictable reward. The same mechanism operates in romantic attachment. When someone loves us inconsistently, when they show affection one moment and withdraw the next, our brains become obsessed with predicting their behavior, with finding the pattern, with earning the warmth that appears and disappears like a mirage. We become addicted to the hope of finally getting it right, of finally making them stay. And this addiction is biochemical. It's not a character flaw. It's how our brains are wired to respond to intermittent reinforcement. There is another layer to this pattern as well. Many people who fall for unavailable partners are themselves afraid of true intimacy. On the surface, they want to be loved, and they do. But on a deeper level, being with someone truly available threatens something in them. Someone who is emotionally unavailable cannot demand that we be fully seen. They cannot require that we be vulnerable in the ways that genuine intimacy requires. There is a safety in pursuing someone who is unreachable. We get to perform love without actually having to risk the profound exposure that real connection demands. If someone cannot love us back, they also cannot hurt us in the way that genuine heartbreak from an available person could. They cannot disappoint us in our moment of need. They cannot fail us, because in some way we never fully expected them to show up for us in the first place. This is the hidden benefit of unrequited love. It protects us from the terror of being known and rejected anyway. It allows us to maintain the fantasy that if they only could, they would. And that fantasy is often more comfortable than the reality of building something with someone real, someone flawed, someone who might actually fail us despite their best intentions. So we stay in these situations. We wait, we hope, we perform, we chase, we convince ourselves that this painful pursuit is noble, that our unwavering love proves something about our character, our capacity for sacrifice, our strength. But what does it actually prove? Often it proves that we learned very early that we are not worthy of uncomplicated love, that we are not deserving of someone who shows up consistently, that we must earn our place through dedication and effort and the willingness to accept crumbs of affection. The real tragedy of falling for someone who cannot love us back is not just the pain of their rejection or unavailability, it's the years we spend not pursuing people who would actually love us fully. It's the relationships we don't build with available partners because they don't trigger the familiar ache that feels like destiny. It's the potential versions of ourselves we never meet because we're too busy trying to resurrect someone else. Every moment spent waiting for an unavailable person is a moment we're not investing in ourselves, not building genuine connections, not experiencing the strange and profound comfort of being loved without condition. There is also something we rarely discuss, the role of fantasy in keeping us trapped. When someone cannot love us back, we are free to imagine that they are perfect. We fill in all the blanks with our own hopes and desires. We don't have to see their flaws or limitations because they aren't there to disappoint us. We construct an idealized version of who they are, and we fall in love with that construction, not the actual person. The actual person could never compete with the fantasy because they would have to be real, and real people are always disappointing in small ways. The unavailable person is frozen in time in our imagination, forever young, forever perfect, forever on the verge of finally seeing what we see in them. It's a beautiful lie, and we tell it to ourselves over and over. Breaking free from this pattern requires something that feels almost impossible. It requires us to look honestly at the roots of why we're drawn to unavailability in the first place. It requires us to examine the attachment patterns we learned as children and understand how they're playing out in our romantic choices now. It requires us to grieve something we never actually had, because what we're really mourning when we long for someone who cannot love us is not usually them. It's the parent or caregiver who was not there, who was not emotionally available, who made us feel like love was something we had to earn. Healing from a pattern of falling for unavailable people is not about willpower. It's about becoming aware. It's about learning to notice when you're being drawn to someone who is emotionally cold and asking yourself why that coldness is attractive to you. It's about recognizing that your nervous system has been trained to interpret distance as interesting, unavailability as attractive, emotional withholding as a puzzle to solve. And then it's about something much harder. It's about learning to feel safe with someone who is actually available, someone who loves you clearly and directly, someone who doesn't make you work for their affection. At first, that kind of straightforward love might feel boring. It might feel like something is missing because the familiar tension is absent. But what you're experiencing is not boredom, it's the discomfort of safety. It's what it feels like when your nervous system is finally allowed to relax. Here is the deeper truth. You are not broken because you fell for someone who couldn't love you. You are human. You are someone whose early experiences taught you to believe that love looks like longing, like distance, like the perpetual hope that someday you will be enough. You learn to love in a language of effort and sacrifice, and the quiet belief that if you just try hard enough, if you just love fiercely enough, you can make someone capable of loving you back. But that language was never really yours to begin with. It was taught to you by people who didn't know how to love you the way you deserved. And now you get to unlearn it. The beautiful irony is that once you do, once you start moving away from unavailable people and toward people who actually show up, once you allow yourself to be loved without having to prove your worth, something shifts. You begin to understand that the love you thought you wanted, the kind that required endless pursuit and sacrifice and hope, was never really love at all. It was desperation dressed up as devotion. Real love is quieter. It's less dramatic. It doesn't require you to chase or perform or convince. It simply shows up and says, I choose you. Not because you have to earn it, but because you are enough as you are. Learning to receive that kind of love and learning to give it to yourself is perhaps the greatest act of freedom you can experience. So when you find yourself drawn to someone who is emotionally unavailable, I invite you to pause, not to judge yourself, but to get curious, to ask what wound this person is touching, to notice what familiar pattern is being activated, and then gently, with compassion for the younger version of you who learned these patterns, begin to choose differently. Begin to notice people who light up when they see you, who make space for you, who love you as clearly and directly as you deserve to be loved. The person you cannot have will always be a fantasy, but the person who loves you really loves you. They are real, and they are so much more beautiful than any fantasy could ever be.